History begins with the confrontation between God, the creator, and his opponent of the devil, who wanted to destroy everything that his opponent created. Two opposite principles have been at war from the very beginning of their existence. The devil took a tricky step. His hatred became the basis for the creation of a specially trained creature, which was called Malak. This monster destroyed the world and everyone who tried to stand in his way. All his opponents fell before him, but the situation was saved by a woman. She saved the world from destruction, taking advantage of the power of God and breaking his opponents. Over time, people began to worship her. They considered her a holy virgin. In her honor was called children and created temples and entire cities. Her act entered the annals of the stories and preserved there until the last moment. Human memory has preserved it forever. The Violet Holiday stood in the moonlight on the balcony. She asked her interlocutor why he did not approach her closer. The young man, who was called Esselmund Ermenhard, replied that he did not want to worry her. The girl continued to ask him. She asked if she should greet her brother on his next victory, or is it worth lying that she was glad to return and add that she had sadly missed him. The boy replied that he knew perfectly about what the girl would say anything frankly and would not be honest with him. The same gives preference to its silence. Violet replied that she considers mutually. Essay added that from this day it became the property of the temple. From the day of her majority, the girl had to leave the walls of her home and move to the temple, thanking her family for the days of a happy family life. But the girl was all the same. She asked her brother sarcastically how to do it properly during her last night at her parents' home. She may need to run to the marquis and cry on his shoulders and ask. Violet passed her brother and reported that no option in her opinion is correct. She doesn't want to go to the temple, but she is ready to do everything he considers the right and important one for her personally. There were many people in the hall. Violet stood with a tall, beautiful man and talked about something with him. The conversation was interesting and captured the interlocutors completely. They did not notice changes in the hall and among the guests. A young man with red hair went through a group of people. It was accompanied by servants in which the temple ministers can be clearly recognized. This young man was called Cesare Tigernan, and he was the youngest cardinal of the temple. One of the servants addressed the girl and reminded her that the moment came to give up staying in the environment in which she grew before. From now on, she is part of the temple and has to leave them from the palace. The cardinal added that her goal is now to glorify God and make him more powerful. The power of the gift of God was also the gift, so the girl had to serve him and the temple, which also glorified his power. Cesare asked when Violet was planning to go to the temple. At that time, he would come to people who will accompany it and protect it from troubles in the way. The young man smiled and tried to like it. Violet replied that it could sound too confident, but it is unworthy to become a holy warrior and protect the temple and serve his will. She considers herself unreliable. She replied to all the objections of the servants that until this day she never witnessed the power of God, and she could never use it. For some reason, he does not believe in it. Culture officials were convinced that the girl was mocking them and just wanted to avoid her departure to the temple. But the girl suggested that they be sure of the truth of her words with the help of God. Cardinal came to the girl with a quick movement and took her shoulders. He looked at her for a long time and was convinced that no power from her was felt. Cesare asked if she planned from the beginning. The girl replied that she did not seek to celebrate the day of her majority, so she should not blame her for adjusting everything and deceiving everyone around. But it was definitely not a sign of the Lord. But Violet replied that she would in no way be able to go to the Pope if she had not intended to devote herself to serving a cult. She apologized for her act, which she could offend the church. Violet believed that the status of the saint for aristocrats and nobles did not cost anything. She was not ready to become a figure on a chessboard. With her help, they just want to get up and get higher status. The girl knew perfectly about her participation, so she does not want to become the Holy Virgin who would use. She will take advantage of her strength to curse everyone who has deceived and manipulated. The little girl was carelessly running a field of daisies. Suddenly, a strong wind rose, and she saw the sky tightened with dark clouds. Among them were two fiery eyes. A loud voice turned to her. The unfamiliar voice said he finally found her. The girl noticed that in this voice mixed joy and grief with the realization of something too difficult to understand the ordinary mortal person. The stranger believed that it was worth running, but the forces left her body and she became a freely voice, and he said everything that she would finally become her. Despair mastered the poor. Hands of dark energy reached for the girl and began to grab her. She was shrouded in them and could not move. The girl just wanted to get away from this place and escape from an unfamiliar attacker. It's all a girl's memories. Violet sat on the floor and could not forget the terrible voice that almost made it his slave, a slave of her mighty will. The girl was surprised what was doing. The old woman, who was called Gout, repeated the girl that she was sheltered and worried about her, and the girl could not do anything normally to pay for her kindness, and yet she dared to sleep for lunch. The woman continued to say that if she had not stopped at the girl at one time, then she would just die or sold to slavery to crazy owners who would do everything she would like. When the Violet finally remained alone, she was able to think about what really worried her. This strange dream has been repeated for the first year. From childhood, she saw the same dream. The voice was constantly sounding to her, but she could not trust him, although the gentle tone attracted her to her. At first, she even wanted to get closer, but then began to fear and tried to run away from him. However, yesterday happened that before no circumstances happened, the voice of her. He took possession of it and began to shake hundreds of hands from dark matter. From this, Violet became somehow not by itself. The fair-haired woman ran to the girl. Her name was Lena, and the woman asked, was the old woman dared to beat a little girl again? Violet replied that she was guilty of this because she had a service. The woman could not calm down. She could not understand why they were so cruel to this little. Instead, the girl asked how Lena herself feels and what she treats her so well. Another woman who lived in this house intervened in the conversation. She was called Rose, and she was not as condescending as Lena. Rose ordered the girl to start working, otherwise Gout again gives her for laziness. Rose asked if Lena did not want to help the girl. She replied that her day had to be free today. However, the redhead reminded that her turn had passed. The women argued in their eyes in Violet. This place was called Flower Street, and it was analogy to the Red Lantern Street. There were very nasty and dark affairs in this room, and the stay of a little girl was not desirable. Girls on this street were given names according to the names of flowers. It was not popular here to be called real names, and Violet was also named in honor of the violet flower, but her life did not become easier. Men used girls on the street. This is the future that was proposed for her. But Violet did not want to stay here and look like girls and women for whom the flower house became a home. The girls who lived in this house gathered at a large breakfast table. Violet helped them. All of them treated the girl who constantly helped them and tried to please them. Rose, meanwhile, told that he did not believe that God would save them. Today she had a priest, and it was very freezing. She did not even want to mention the details of that evening. She wanted to forget that moment. The girl with the mug of beer, who was called Fresvet, assured that the priests did not visit their quarter for the first time, and nothing wrong with it happened. She just didn't want to look at fantastic hopes. Lena told that the clergy were just the most frequent clients of their institution, and they always paid well, despite what they did the opposite of what they preached. But one of the girls was hostile to the temple ministers who visited them and used services, and after that, the kingdom could be called sacred and insisted on the will of God. This girl was Lydia. It has always been marked by a too serious attitude to everything that happened around, and the only one who had the courage to oppose the order brought in a quarter of flowers. The girl continued to ask rhetorical questions as to what the Pope at all is doing and why he could not wean such types from the church. After all, they should help people, not the other way around. Rose replied what they should expect when the holidays were not in their world for about 120 years. The girl even began to speak prot that the Lord simply left them in his sins. Walta was very painful to hear that the girls did not believe in salvation at the hands of the Holy Virgin, as if she did not care what was happening on a sinful earth. And Rose continued to say that there is every chance of making money in little. The girls at the table really appreciated the girl who was really beautiful and very sweet. They even envied what this flower will become when its time comes, and it was really very shy. Rose hugged Violet and said she was actually the only chance to survive them. This little beauty did not consider her girlfriends and mentors dirty and not worthy of respect girls. Wayole was actually admired by them. She believed that people were too cruel to them, pointing their fingers on them. However, the pain broke her soul from the realization that she could not help them. Wayole believed that they were the best and most kind girls around the world. For her, these were the only good people who happened on her short life path, and the girl really considered them her sisters. From this cheerful feast, all the appearance of gout was detached. The woman was angry. She immediately attacked the girl. From the anger of the old face has changed very much. She couldn't believe that someone was not listening to her. The woman struck a poor girl and fell on the floor in front of her. The girl did not know what to do now. Her girlfriends stood around, but no one dared to contradict Gout and point out her mistake and cruelty. The woman also attacked other girls who worked in this institution. She asked how they dared to steal a drink from Scald and drink in broad daylight when there is so much work and worries ahead. But Gout was difficult to stop. The old Gamzelle was a poor girl. She believed that she was specifically mocking her and spending in vain the money that the woman made very hard and who loved them. Lena still stood up for a little girl. She asked the mistress to stop and stop beating the baby. The girl promised to pay for all the expenses that Violet was the owner of the Red House. Rose threw a silver decoration on the floor. It was another gift from a grateful client. Gout did not consider that it was a gift to the girl. She took him as a fee for the damage caused. The old man thought it normal. Finally, the woman calmed down. She stopped beating the Violet, but simply reported that the girl was left without dinner today. When the Gout came out, the girls began to help the poor beaten. But soon the girl lay down in bed and she started a strong heat. The girlfriends tried to help her in every possible way, and their efforts had no effect. The body of Violet seemed to be hurt at all and was alien. The girl realized that he needed to get up and go to perform her duties. But suddenly she noticed a strange vision. Violet stood in the middle of the flower field. A stranger was opposite her. She called the girl. The woman said that it was time to act. The prayers were too sad and lacking faith so that they had some effect. Violet doubted her strength and power. The girl thought about what she could become useful for a stranger and why she insisted that she wakes up and went to her. But somewhere from the outside she heard the voice of a girlfriend who asked her to wake up. Suddenly, she noticed that Rose and Lena were worried about for some reason. The redhead reminded that it was worth a hurry because the families are already inside, and they need to get out of here as soon as possible and save their lives. Lena began to explain that the girl's condition does not allow her to run quickly. But Rose stressed that time for weakness and tears has long passed. Now it is worth moving and acting strongly for the future life. Violet thought something terrible happened. After all, it had to be night and darkness, and there was very light around and fire was burning. A terrible understanding made it through her through a dream, and a terrible reality mastered it. Rose called Lena and a girl to run out of a fire covered with fire faster. Finally, they had time to jump out through the open door. Now it was necessary to beware not to come across robbers. The group of girls ran the street. Homes were burning around, but they did not pay attention to it. One of the girls asked why they were delayed because of Violet, because they risked their lives through her. But Lena reassured her that the girl is only 10 years old, and she is their loyal girlfriend and sister. The conversations should be left for later, and now get to the house of the local aristocrat. The beloved of one of the inhabitants of the flower house told that the local nobleman had a powerful power for the local gangs of robbers to fear him, and did not even dare to show his nose near his estate. The fugitives were lying in the dark forest. The darkness prevailed. They were fearfully considered around, waiting for the pursuit of themselves. Someone asked what happened to their mistress, Mrs. Gout, but no one answered. Due to her bad attitude, she did not even deserve a drop of sympathy in girls who worked on her and spent her life for her enrichment in unfair working conditions. So they preferred to remain silent. Lena asked comrades if this really means that they would become free and be able to start a new life. Rose replied that you need to get to another city and save your lives. One of the girlfriends talked about the famous local marquis, who was friends with the king himself and was considered one of his most loyal swords and servants. They will be safe under his protection. The mood of the girls has improved, and now they have talked without fear of what everyone would start when they would be safe and freedom. Only Violet went silent and thought about her future. Suddenly, everyone fell silent as a team. The girls noticed ahead of the fire that approached them, going to meet. The fugitives were not scared. It was worth running off the road until they were noticed and stopped. Suddenly, a group of soldiers led by a noble horse came to meet them. Rose assured her girlfriends that she should not be afraid. It was a detachment of royal guard, and they would save them. Probably the soldiers went to deal with robbers. Frisia ran to the commander. She was certain that her lover recognized her and began to thank her for having come across them in this dark forest. The girl told that she wanted to find him in the city, but the young man was silent. It surprised the girl. He looked at her silently. The girlfriends noticed that the facial expression of these knights is too frightening and anxious. The atmosphere became more tense and terrifying. With a rapid movement, Will took the sword and hit the girl who loved him. The fugitives were stuck. They did not know where to start. Everyone was shocked because Freysia was talking about her knight. Violet was shocked. A few seconds ago, Freysia laughed and entertained them, giving hope for the future. And now her body was lying on the cold earth, and hope and faith were thawing directly in her eyes, killing morally. The girls stared at the sword from which the blood flowed. The detachment commander told that the Marquis ordered to deal with the remains of the gang of the attackers. The poor realized that they did not save them. The fugitives rushed to flee to the forest, hoping to find the rescue from the soldiers who ran after them. Panic mastered them, and they did not know how to do it right and where to run to escape. The spear punched the small body of Lydia. The girl did not even have time to understand what happened and why acute pain pierced her all and took her last strength. Violet was the only one noticed the death of her sister. Finally, the group of girls reached the rescue darkness of the forest. Violet was thinking about why the world was not so fair. After all, they did nothing bad, and these soldiers go around and try to find them. Suddenly they were trapped. The warriors surrounded the fugitive. The noise and torches were illuminated by the glade, which had something terrible and irreparable. The girls began to pray. The soldiers realized that they were pursuing no bandits and robbers, but ordinary scared girls. The commander went on a horse and saw that his subordinates were hesitant. He asked if they wanted to go against the will of the Marquis. Men approached the fugitives. The girls tried to tell about the mistake that happened and that they did not bandit. But no one was about to listen to the fear of the owner, and the blind rage was dizzy. Finally, only Violet remained in the Pollyanna. The bodies of her girlfriends lay in front of her on the ground. Finally, someone tried to hug the girl and protect against deadly weapons. She was interested in who this brave man was. But this secret should remain only between her and the unknown, because now the life of the small will also break from the mighty blow of a knightly sword. She had no doubt, because she witnessed cruelty. The terrible warrior was already standing over the girl and lifted his sword above her. She didn't see the attacker's face. The secret voice awakened inside the Violet and ordered her to wake up from sleep and master herself. The next moment, the girl felt a terrible pain in her head. She thought that she finally died, and her suffering ended. But before his eyes stood the figure of the soldier from whom the blood flew and his comrades. The warriors were surprised and a little frightened at the girl. They did not expect what happened to their brother. The teams of the young man on horseback had no result. The men froze in place and did not move. The commander sprouted from the horse. He was angry with his people. But suddenly his intentions changed. The young man realized that only a little terrible happened, that he could change his and the lives of thousands of people. In front of Violet, the commander and his subordinate knights kneel. The young man called her saint and continued to kneel silently. The poor still did not reach that she was saved and that she was called holy. In the holy castle of the kingdom, the aggregation has collected the servants. There was a meeting of the most proxy of His Majesty. All of them discussed the appearance of the Holy Virgin this night in the forest near the place of attack. The Marquis Bjorn Ermenhard was heading. He was thinking that the appearance of the Holy Virgin could strengthen the positions of the Pope and his factions. It is also necessary to quickly take safety measures to overcome the problem. Holidays have shown herself a long 120 years after her last coming. But most of all, it was surprised that she was a common man who lived in the House of Flowers, which was famous for the bad. All at the table began to discuss this news. Some dared to assume that the gossip about the Holy Virgin was considered a long time with simple legends, which were told by the servants of the cult and temples. But most of all, it was frightened that in this case, the terrible enemy of all humanity and all living things, Malum, could also be a real character, and therefore it was necessary to keep alert before it. The king was angry. He believed that he was not very lucky because the holidays chose the moment of his reign. This meant additional problems for its and so difficult state government. But even more, he was worried that every few centuries, holidays and Malum were conflicted. Their battle was fierce, but always had catastrophic consequences for living and surviving. Last 120 years ago, Anastasia's holiday won Malum in a fierce battle. Some believed that evil would win this time. However, the girl withstood, but she left behind a bad prophecy. One of the nobles suggested considering her appearance as a chance for the king. After all, she could stand on his side because the information is said to be a little girl. The same holiday could stand against the Pope faction. Now, it was worth considering the girl as a future puppet, which will be popular in the faction that she wants to take possession. Nevertheless, she will obey the will of her rulers. Another aristocrat reported that it was necessary to make a decisive decision at this meeting because soon a delegation had to arrive from the Pope, and the king had to decide what to do with a little holiday. Some were sorry for King Triton because the man still tried to wash away from the shame of his predecessor. Then it seemed that God left the king's past at one of their troubles. Marquis turned to His Majesty and said that he had one idea, but you need to act quickly and decisively. He listened carefully to his faithful vassal because he more than once helped him in a difficult moment. Violet dreamed of a dream in which she saw her late mother. The unfamiliar striker kept the woman for her hair and wanted to kill the poor. The mother shouted and asked to leave her poor daughter alive. A terrible monster, similar to the woman, mocked the girl. She called the poor because everything was lost. She will in no way help parents who have already died in torment. Violet woke up in bed. She realized that it was a next nightmare that pursued her since childhood. However, after meeting in the forest, he changed and began to show the events of a girl's early childhood. Suddenly, she remembered that all her girlfriends and called sisters died last night at the hands of Marquis soldiers. Before their eyes, there was a terrible scene of the execution of girls. They asked for mercy, but the knights were cruel. The girl almost did not care about the excitement. She realized that the events of last night were not a dream, but a terrible and spooky reality, and now she remained alone in an unfamiliar place and without a defender. Violet switched to the fact that she had a very bad head and the girl could not understand where she got. Yesterday's events were very difficult, and she was not ready to think. A servant with a glass of water on a tray came to the girl. The servant was glad that the poor man came to her senses. The girl asked what was the place. The servant replied that it was the estate of Marquis Ermenhard. Violet thought that she got to the palace of a very influential and significant person in these places. The high-ranking aristocrat will be able to help her and protect her. It is not in vain in this room. The girl was extinguished, and the servant noticed it. She asked if something happened in the saint. Violet was confused. She asked if the Virgin's Holy Virgin was also in this room, but the maid reassured her. She did not fully understand what the saint was called it, and turned respectively. It was difficult to realize. Now she replied that everyone around everyone is wrong, and she does not consider herself a saint. The girl squeezed on the bed and thought that she did not want to deceive anyone. After all, when the truth opens, it can be punished, and she did not want to add unnecessary suffering. The servant asked the girl to calm down. After all, God could hear her words and get angry with her because of it. But Violet believed that the one who brought her to this palace was definitely mistaken and could not be like that. The girl suggested that the saint look in the mirror. Violet looked at herself in surprise. The girl saw that strange changes happened to her appearance. At night, her hair and eyes changed the color to the opposite, and the girl appeared stigma at the head. It was a direct evidence that she was chosen by the deity in order to be a harbinger of light and his defender. Violet was still difficult. The poor thought that all her life believed that God left her on the contrary. But the fact that he actually chose her with his leader meant that the girl would not suffer and wander more. She still believed that they were all wrong, or she sleeps firmly. The girl was rubbed with what? The clerk warned that when she would rub him so, it is certainly a gap on the forehead, so it is worth stopping. Violet was still repeating that she would not be able to believe in her purpose, and she was definitely not her. She was scared from the fact that she no longer see herself the previous one. It changed irreversibly. Another girl ran into the room. She warned that it was necessary to dress the holiday very quickly. His Majesty ordered the girl to quickly bring him into the palace for a serious conversation with the nobles. Some of the aristocrats believed that Tyoden made unjust decisions on their own, and all the state and its subordinates may be affected. But the violence caused not so nobles as representatives of the church. The Holy Fathers shouted and voted. They could not believe that they were appointed part of the aristocratic kind. However, the king replied that she was born on his lands, so he was an aristocrat. Ehrenhard spoke in defense of the little and promised that his genus personally took care of the girl. He also promised that she would decide on her own further fate after the age of majority and debut. The priest threatened that the Marquis would respond to his actions. After all, the aristocrat went against the will of God himself, and his act threatens tens of thousands of lives of the subjects of King Tiden. But the trick failed. The cult's servant tried to quarrel with the king and cause the anger of the latter. However, Titidin was holding on, because he had previously discussed the details with Evangard and knew about the approaches of occultists and temple ministers. A few hours before, the aristocrat and the king, in the presence of other members of the royal council, discussed the question that the girl would become part of the Evergrad kind and will be there until the age of majority. The Marquis recalled the existence of St. Augbert, a territory in which the power of the Pope was much stronger than the will of the royal majesty. Over the last 120 years, believing have been grouped there, and the nobility that joined the Pope's faction made very generous donations on temples and the church. And before that, they have always promised military support in solving problematic issues and conflicts. The appearance of the Holy Virgin on the side of the churchmen would make their faction omnipotent. Many followers and faithful vassals of the king would go to the side of the Pope. The same should be left in a state of its highness. All the holy children who came to this were noble families and did not need additional training in the main bases of etiquette and behavior. However, this time there is another order. The same Marquis asked the ruler it would not be more correct to nurture the Holy Virgin in the aristocrat's house, not in the temple where the clergy will try to turn it to the side of the Pope and the Church. And when everyone knows that the girl actually lives in the Marquis house and is under his protection, the girl does not dare to blame or try to lure her. The king agreed. After all, when the conflict comes, everyone will witness that the Pope and his subjects put their own interests much higher than the interests of ordinary citizens and the ruling top. It is such a speech against his royal honor that will mean that the Church led by the Pope violate the order and oppose the established order. Aristocrats from the Pope fraction will harm themselves. Some wanted to oppose this order. Even when the Pope expels the aristocracy, the success of the case will be half a success. The king asked if some alternative would be offered. Troyden stressed that in this case they made the final decision. However, it should be hoped that the girl will take a hand that wants to help her. Holidays will make the right choice. Violet came to the palace of His Highness of the King. The girl is amazed at what beauty is in this world. For some reason she was very nervous because she couldn't even imagine that Titidin could want her. While the Violet was going to the palace, a servant who was specially attached to her to help a young lady reassured the frightened girl. The poor man mentioned the events last night and could not believe it. Cardinal changes occurred literally in a moment. Her hair became lighter, the color of the eyes has changed. A completely different person looked at her in the mirror, but now she thought about whether she could return alive. She was most frightened by the fact that even from her past life there was no trace, and there was no place from now on where it could return. At this stage of life, the girl frightened everything, and no one helped her. She only reassured the servant that treated her very well and tried to always support and rejoice in a good word. The woman was constantly repeating that Violet is now the most important person in this country. The service was introduced to the girl. She was called Finn. Violet suddenly noticed that the woman was very similar to her mother. But she tried to reject this idea because she realized that people could not be attached. The knight led the girl a corridor. He warned that King Titidin was waiting for her personally. Unfortunately, Finn could not go with the girl to the palace because she was not invited to audience. Although Violet realized that she would be much calmer along with her woman, and she would treat her more good. Finally, the knight reported that they came to the entrance to the royal reception. The girl was nervous. From the door, loud cries and disputes were heard. She was interested in what was happening behind the door, and why at that moment she had to stand before aristocrats and nobles. In the room, she caught a tired king on the throne who indifferently hung her head and looked at what was happening in the hall before him. Aristocrats and nearby persons shouted and quarreled. It seemed that a fight would begin. The appearance of the girl reassured the parties to the conflict. Everyone was surprised to look at a little girl who led the knight by hand through the whole hall so that she could say hello to the king and talk to this highness. Violet was not in itself from the fact that everyone was looking at her. She felt strange, and she was not comfortable. It seemed that all the attention of each present was concentrated on it, and they were carefully studying it. Due to fear, the girl could not even lift her head. In this form, she appeared before His Majesty the King. He looked carefully at a girl who had to save the world from the world's evil of Maluk. The knight asked the girl to kneel in front of the king. Violet humbly did the way she was told. The girl felt frightened, although the look of His Highness was good and for some reason expressed a great suffering. But this order was outraged by the priest. He asked very loudly to hear all those present why the Holy Virgin had to kneel in front of the king, a secular ruler. Violet believed that there was an error. The girl was disturbed by the fact that after the deception is revealed, she can be beaten very much. She was afraid of what was faced with the most powerful man throughout the kingdom. Therefore, the fear made it to the bones. The king began to descend to her. He ordered the girl to stand on his feet, but she couldn't do it. The nobles and aristocrats began to say that there were not even drops of dignity. Priests came to the rescue. They picked up a frightened girl in order to just put her on her feet so that the aristocrats and the approaching king of Tidon were not having a chance. Suddenly, the girl saw a man who often visited their institution and enjoyed mocking Lydia. Now he kneeled in front of her and tried to please the girl in every possible way. Finally, the high priest Dublin asked what was going on. The man could not allow the girl to stay alone with these strange people. The king and his vassals were frightened by such a turn. His Majesty softened his position. He said it was time for the holidays to make their own choice and choose the one to stay with. The Marquis was invited to the way. The man greeted all those present. Baron knees in front of a girl who officially called the Holy Envoy. The man said he was very happy to meet her, but it is time to choose the one with whom the messenger of heaven and the Lord wanted to remain. Violet was standing between the priest and the Marquis. She still thought about words. Right now, her later life was decided. The girl could not come together with thoughts. For her, it was a very scary choice. The king turned to her and offered two alternatives. Or she becomes a foster daughter of the Marquis, or she will become a sergeant of the temple right now. The priest was outraged by such proposals. The clergyman said that the Holy Virgin had to go to the temple immediately to fulfill her direct mission. But Théoden asked why the priest dared to show disobedience to His Highness. Théoden turned to the girl. He said no one can influence her choice now, and she has no one to fear. After all, the royal power will not threaten it. Will thought about the prospects. In the house of her named father, she should have the prospect of learning and knowing the world, freely moving the Marquis's possessions so king and serving people. And there was no place for her in the temple. Violet was confused. A lot of events happened in one morning. She turned out to be a holy virgin, arrived at the King Trident's palace, and now she is offered to choose a side that will affect her life. But finally the girl realized that he should not be angry with His Majesty and delayed time. She reached out in the direction of the Marquis. It could only mean one thing. Violet made its final choice. She stated that she did not want to be near people who looked like a priest who mocked her late girlfriend, and whom she often told her, talking about various dirty things and very hellish torments. The priest was still trying to save the situation, but understood that he had lost this battle to the king completely. The man tried to jam to the girl and explain that the place of the Holy Virgin in the temple, where she was taught. Eventard replied that he did a very painful girl through her soldiers. The same on his conscience hangs a grave sin, and he is simply obliged to provide a decent life with his new ward, his daughter. The priest looked fiercely at the Marquis, and he answered that he did not want to play political games. He simply considers herself obliged to thank the girl for being ready to forgive him and reconcile. The aristocrat stood opposite the priest. This is how this conversation was worth it, to show the temple that there was no point in playing with the nobleman, and it is not necessary to even try to do it, and then they would regret it. The king thought that in fact the girl could not accept the side of the Marquis and his king. However, it is worth thank you for the fact that this card will not be able to play others related to the temple and its servants. The priest meanwhile regretted that there was no Duke of Tigrenin, the future cardinal of the church. He would not allow the Holy Virgin to stay in a state of the enemy. This boy would even go to violence for the purpose. The Marquis reached out to the girl and suggested going to her new home. The girl was embarrassed, but she wanted to stay alone with her fears and whites. The nobleman will help her accurately. The priest Dublin began to shout loudly. He insisted that a man could not just pick up the Holy Virgin, but the Marquis replied that the girl made her choice. To resist him, to go against the will of the king. When Violet and her new father were already left behind Dublin's back, he turned to her. The voice of the man was excited and angry. He promised that the girl would regret this act and would suffer through him. Holidays have already sat with the Marquis in a carriage. She looked carefully at her husband. At that time he cast his gaze on her. None of them dared to speak. However, it is time to start establishing a relationship. The man was the first to turn to Violet. He apologized for so much the poor man survived in the last 2 days. The road to the palace also added tension. However, there will be a lot of change from now on. Evagard said that there are no women in his home. Wayelet was surprised, because many servants were girls or women, but the Marquis explained that women have only servants and staff. The girl did not understand what her father called. She was surprised that it was from this that he began a conversation with a little girl. He added that he personally traces her to know nothing. Wayelet was surprised. After all, the high-ranking aristocrat, which she has never met before, now says that she will monitor her safety and help and protect in every possible way. The girl understood the true cause of this attitude. If it were not for the status of the Holy Virgin, she would not have such a leisure on the Marquis. It became more frightening, because when the truth was revealed, it would get worse. She also thought that a man could disappear from her life at any time. After all, everyone she loved and respected disappeared in different circumstances and left her alone with troubles and troubles. In her opinion, it did not make sense to think about it, because she could not do anything about it. She did not notice how she got to the palace. There they were met by a butterfold, who was ordered to take care of the young lady. Also in the house was already waiting for Finn. She waited for the girl, and she immediately ran to her. She was glad because she found an old acquaintance in this house. She began to attach to and miss this service. The Bogretsky immediately came to the conclusion that this girl will now take care of the holiday. Wayelet was a great pleasure in this proposal. From this the girl became very pleasant and warm in the shower. Finn became almost native, according to her girls, sisters from the flower house immediately. But there were no longer. The girl began a new life. The Marquis looked carefully at the girl and saw her smiling for the first time. Finn asked whether to introduce a girl to young ladies now, but the Marquis warned the servant that it is not necessary to hurry up with important decisions. The girl did not understand his mood change. The girl worried that her father would leave and did not say goodbye to her. But the Marquis sat around her and said that in this state she is the most important person, and no one will be able to match it. Therefore she in no way had to bow her head. This behavior does not consider her status. It is worth noting to behave in a similar way. However, teachers will deal with it. Wayelet asked how she should deal with him. After all, she had to play the role of her father's daughter. He replied that they are officially official and daughter from now on. It has to take some time for full awareness. That's where their conversation ended. The man went on to do his own public affairs, and the girl remained in the company of Finn. The servant reassured her and told that Evagard was really good. The Marquis stood under the wall. He thought about the case with Violet. In fact, in good families, children sometimes bow to their father. But it is not easy to take this girl. It is even harder to see her daughter in her. The next day, the service brought breakfast to the Violet room. The girl noticed that the holy, crying eyes. She immediately realized that she did not sleep, but cried. The girl knew that the night was often pessimistic. So all night she thought that she was here because of someone's mistake, and that all her life was a common mistake. And the Marquis and the king are very mistaken when they consider it saint. But no one is safe. Due to constant alarm, there were new reasons for crying. The servant combed the hair of the saint, and Violet thought about what they could do when the nobles and the king were aware of their mistake. Finn noted that when a girl first got into the house, her body was covered with bruises and wounds. Now there is no trace of them. What could be a manifestation of the power of the Holy Virgin and divine providence? The service, meanwhile, asked if the girl was ready to meet the young gentleman. Violet thought. This phrase caused it bad memories of what had to happen further. After all, when she was in the House of Flowers, the appearance of young aristocrats did not promise anything good. They were all cruel and too proud. But this meeting is in no way avoided. It is necessary to be ready. Finn noticed that the girl was upset. The girl asked the saint why she had a mood and why she does not want to go to her new brothers, so to get acquainted with them and make them. Two boys sat at the table. They considered their new sister carefully. The girl felt guilty that she was late to meet them. The smaller of the brothers asked who it was in front of them. It was the third son of the Marquis family. He was called Idria. He was hostile, but the reason was that his age was forced to treat girls in a similar way and to treat accordingly. The father stood up for a small one. He promised that they would punish them for being bad for a new sister, and in addition, it was holy. The same Marquis demanded a good attitude to it under any conditions. Another son knees in front of the girl. He said he was glad to get acquainted with the Holy Virgin. After all, he heard a lot about her quarrels that arose around her person at a meeting of Royal Majesty yesterday. The young man was called Daniel. He was the second son of the Marquis. The girl was just delighted with what she saw such a beautiful guy so close to herself. Usually in the House of Flowers, they had a different purpose of the visit. Adrian stood his brother and asked him if their sister was too stupid. The father asked his son to behave with dignity. He is not a boy. He is a descendant of the glorious kind and should behave accordingly. The father looked carefully at the little one. Adrian asked why he should kneel before the commotion. He is not obliged to crawl to the unknown whom they simply consider the sacred from the legend. The father turned to his son with such an icy voice that it was safe to light a fire in the chimney. The boy immediately realized that it was not a place for further piercing with his father, and he was silent. The family was sitting at the table. The girl felt superfluous. It was difficult for her to get used to her new state. However, his father tried in every possible way to support her and help. He ordered the sons to behave restrained and culturally. The Marquis asked the servant if his son Esselmund woke up. The girl was surprised. She did not hope that there was another son in the family. She thought that in the future she would only have 2 brothers. That is, she was waiting for a meeting with another son of a named father. The girl worried that she could not predict how a future meeting with him would go. She noticed that the place next to her is empty. The Holy Virgin watched everyone who was sitting at the table. She carefully studied how to use the cutlery and how others do it. The younger brother smiled maliciously. He began to mock the girl, believing that the girl was called the Holy Virgin, but he has no idea how to behave at the table and how to eat different kinds of dishes served. The senior brother stood up for the girl. He ordered to stop because the manners of Adrian himself were no better at the table. He starred, but stopped his mockery of a small defenseless girl. Finn came to the aid of the girl. She gave her cutlery and briefly told how to use them. The girl was very grateful for help. The servant gradually taught her manners, accepted among the nobles. The Marquis looked carefully at the girls, and eventually advised his daughter to take several etiquette lessons. The owner of the house believed that Finn would be a great teacher for his daughter. The servant thanked the trust. Already after breakfast, Violet thought about it. How many conventions existed during meals, and so aristocracy complicated this simple usual process. She became embarrassed by all these rules. A senior brother approached the girl. He asked not to pay attention to Aiden because he was still a child. Much has been unattainable to understand it so far. The young man tried to comfort the girl. Violet was ashamed, and she escaped. The girl thought about whether she would be able to become a better version of herself. Every moment she lived in this estate indicated that it was not really a place. Finn found her mistress in the room. The girl was sitting on a pedialogue. She was bad after meals. A strange feeling did not let go of the girl. She began to worry that such attacks would be repeated. Soon the Finn and the Holidays were sitting on the bed. The servant replied that the girl needed to take a shower. After all, an important visit is planned today, and the lady cannot go to meet with important persons in this form. Violet asked where she should go this time. The servant replied that a visit to the king's palace is scheduled today. To do this, the Marquis sent many ministers that should serve the body of his daughter well. The girl protested. She stressed that it could do all this. Finn assured that it was not surprising. After all, this is their direct duty, to serve the young lady of the mistress. In the hall of the estate, the Marquis talked to the Bogretsky in parish. The man wondered if the Holiday was ready for departure and visit to the king's palace. Servants reported that the lady meeting sometimes takes some time to do so. Finally, Violet descended the stairs. The father was just shocked by the beauty of his foster daughter. He agreed with the butter that the girl would become a real beauty because it is now visible. The girl asked in Finn whether she would be able to avoid mistakes at the king's reception this time. The servant replied that she believed in the literacy and mind of a young lady, so today everything should go and go properly. Already in the king's reception, Marcus turned to his daughter. He asked her to be careful and attentive to prevent mistakes in behavior with his highness and his relatives. The aristocracy does not forgive such. He also emphasized that Violet should avoid any contacts and meetings with the temple ministers. After all, they do not have to steal it and imprison it in one of the secret monasteries or temples. The king sat and drank tea. The girl and father sat beside him on the couch. Théoden asked how the girl was called. He did it a little contemptuous, but the girl behaved restrained and held seriously. The king noted that the girl is called as a Violet. He asked his father if he knew that. The Marquis did not know that to answer his highness. The ruler dreamed of him because he did not know how to call his foster daughter. The ruler recommended that the teacher hire an etiquette for the girl and be more attentive to education, and when it comes to the study of religion, then pick up a ready-made ideological theologian accordingly. But really unexpected for the girl was the proposal to find a fencing teacher. She did not understand why the future lady learning to own a sword and a cold weapon. However, the word of the king was the law. Troyden emphasized that he considers such a lesson. The Marquis confirmed his words. In order to win the future, Malik is not enough preparation of theoretical physical strength is needed. The father also added that such knowledge will also need a girl in order to protect herself in all kinds of dangerous situations related to the attack of enemies or enemies from the church. Men spoke and doubts began to torment the girl. She began to doubt that she would be able to cope with all these new tasks. In her opinion, much has fallen on her maiden's shoulders. The king noticed that the girl was not very felt. He suggested his father to call the servants and take the holiday outside so that she could breathe fresh air. A small preference will benefit her. The guest replied that he thought about the same. A young boy got into his eyes who served his highness. It was to him that the Marquis ordered his daughter to walk while he and the king will decide. The girl and her new friend were walking on the street. For some reason, she was ashamed of her own behavior, but a huge fountain that struck the girl with his beauty was torn from thought. It seemed as if she were going. Suddenly, the girl felt something like that. She began to understand the language of animals. She held a bird in her hands. Is that exactly one of the manifestations of her divine power, which allowed to understand such things? The girl and servant were approaching the priest. Violet recognized in him the man who was mocking Lydia. Now he tried to play a scene of concern about the state of a young person, the Holy Virgin. But the Violet was not provoked. He tried to trust her in every possible way because of good, kind words, but the girl did not want to talk to him. Berkestel tried to approach the girl. The priest tried to persuade the girl to go with him to the temple. Cardinal Cesare was nearby, so he will be able to protect them from persecution and Marquis's soldiers or the king himself. The servant intervened in the conversation. But Sviatosha was called on a young man. He emphasized that the ordinary servant does not even dare to say the servant of a great temple. For such a misconduct, he had to wait for the Lord to punish. The expression of the holy servant's face scared the girl. Violet escaped. The priest looked angry with the girl and tried to scare to her and stop the girl. The servant was glad to save her. The holy Virgo did as the name was ordered by her named father. As soon as she saw the clergyman, she immediately rushed. The bird above her showed the Violet followed. The bird led it to a strange place. The girl regretted that she followed her, because one could not just trust. Suddenly, a strong hand grabbed the girl and attracted to herself, but she rested. But her fear passed when she lifted her head and saw a young boy who just held her hand firmly, because otherwise she was ready to bite him again and flee. For some reason, the girl thought that her real prince, which was often mentioned by her girlfriend Rose, it became scared of what she just did. Now it will be punished. Perhaps they will be driven. Violet sat on the floor and looked at the prince graciously. She mentally apologized for this unworthy act. If the information about it is highly high, then serious problems can have a marquise. The young man asked why the girl considered him a prince. After that, he gave her hand silently and offered to climb her feet. The girl was very surprised by his behavior and manners of the aristocrat. The boy took the girl's arms and reported that he should go to the palace, because her father is looking for and waiting. The stranger told her that he was the eldest son of the Marquis. Esselmund asked not to delay the hike. The eldest son of Marquis said that the prince was actually only 5 years since birth. But next time you should be careful with what and who you talk in the king's palace. And next time it is necessary to be careful, because their genus will suffer immediately when something happens to it. The girl was scared of this. She could not believe that through her could destroy the whole genus of ancient aristocrats. Violet became ashamed again. However, the warmth of the arms and touches of Amaensis were very pleasant and worthy of creating something again to feel, and then she promised to be careful. The service reported that yesterday the Marquis returned from the king very angry and talked to something for a long time with his eldest son. Weole could not understand what caused his father's anger on yesterday. She thought she did everything as he often demanded from her. Finn broke off and warned that a teacher would be engaged in a girl from today. Her wife, a Viscountess Askler, will teach. The girl obeyed and went to breakfast. She did not want to go to the room where meals took place. The younger brother will laugh at her again. However, the girl decided to look into her eyes with her fears and troubles. Her surprise had no limits when she saw the oldest brother at the table. He took a seat next to her. The younger sat politely, and did not even dare to say about her arrival and joke over the poor. The girl was awkward to sit around him. The young man looked at her carefully. Wayelet was worried that it would be a smile in his eyes when she began to eat with the help of appliances and everything necessary for this. They served a delicious fresh bread to the table. The girl was very surprised because earlier she ate only bad stale bread and it was difficult to find good food in the former Madame Goutt's Flower's house. Aiden did not like bread. He attacked the girl and asked why she did not use the appliances. In addition, she was not going to use them in principle. The girl, in his opinion, was smeared. The girl thought she was the first to do. The guy's words were very surprised and taken away. Panic began to master her emotions because she was ashamed of her older brother. But he did not notice. The middle brother stood up for the girl. He explained that the girl has not yet begun to study, so it is not necessary to immediately attack her and explain something that she is not doing right. Wayelet has become easier. The girl was over, energy, accidentally dumped a plate on the floor. She sat on the floor and began to collect pieces of plates. She was very ashamed of her clumsiness, but more frightening that the older brother saw it. But he just took her hand. The young man stressed that she should stop doing so. He also added that the girl behaves very strangely, and everything was wounded and can pick up something. The servant said that Violet should quickly return to the room and there they would treat the wounds. The girl could not understand what she was attacked and why she was so strange, though she knew that she should not do so. The holidays kept until it entered the room. There she gave herself to herself and burst into tears. Finn tried to reassure her. However, the girl did not want to give her difficulties and annoyance. Wayelet said Finn that she did not want to be in this estate. Even eating was a real test for her. Each time she thought about what could do something wrong and get angry. Finn hugged her mistress. She began to complain about what he considered herself quite clumsy. The appearance of the owner of the house was distracted from the conversation. He suggested that the girl eat alone. The man tried in every possible way to enter her position. After that, he turned and left the room. Finn insisted that the owner specifically went to her to reduce the stress she receives. After a noon, a girl teacher arrived. The lady was called Adela Iskander, and she will become a new manner teacher and good behavior that a good, educated young lady should be made from a girl in a short time. The girl really liked the manners and smoothness of the ladies. Adela even sat down in front of the girl, as it was in the homes of aristocracy and nobility. Wayelet wanted to start training. The lady began to tell all the intricacies of how a noble virgin should behave and what rules of etiquette prevail in the society of nobility and aristocracy. Something seemed very unpleasant to the girl. In some ways, Adela explained that the girl exhibits herself weak. Her kindness in this case plays against her. The girl realized that he should survive a certain transformation, though she is not desirable. Adela said that the girl should control her low origin. It should not be its weakness. And at the same time, it is necessary to constantly control your posture and movements of the body, which will become glorious. The woman emphasized that for the daughter of the Marquis, the appearance had to become the main one, which he should think. To begin with, the Wayelet should heal his wounds in his hands, because the strength allows you to do it. Adela was strict, but a fair teacher and a mentor. Nothing could hide from her attention. She had to control and correct the smallest drawbacks of Wayelet to become an aristocracy. The woman warned that they had a lot of work today. The girl had to absorb a large amount of material, so do not waste time on Teraven. A few hours later, the girl looked tiredly at her hands. For some reason, the power was not intensified. Wayelet began to worry about it because she began to think again that her status of the saint was far, fetched by people, and has no basis. Time has passed very quickly. Finn brought to eat for the mistress. The girl asked the servant if she could return to the joint dining room after studying the rules of etiquette and behavior at the table, adopted in the nobles. The girl was very happy, but at the same time came awareness of how many else it is necessary to study. But it was frightened whether it will remain after its brains are so totally washed and filled. This thought has been spinning from the very beginning as soon as she arrived at this house. The girl realized that she got to another world, but it did not mean that she would be different and would change for worse. Wayelet realized that the transformation was epical. It turns from a common man, a peer, a lady who is considered holy and is the owner of the people and the ruling class at the same time. but whether she will remain inside the same girl who will pass this difficult way to stay alive and not become a puppet in the hands of the aristocracy and the king, or do not get to the temple. Finn convinced that the girl should not even think about such things. After all, she is really a very good and kind person. Education and lessons will not change its inner, its real, what it really is. The girl was walking along with the Finn garden near the Marquis Palace. Over the last few days, the girl has grown as if she had no problem. At lunch, she was herself, and then engaged in viscountese. The service was constantly helping the girl. She was near and supported Violets. Viscount had learned that the girl could not read. She began to rely on her even more, taught to read and write. Violet was standing on the balcony and thinking about whether it was really better. Suddenly, her younger brother took her hand. He asked why the sister did not want to cure divine power, because she can do it. The boy had already begun to climb on the balcony and was surprised so quickly wounds on the girl's body. He was pleasantly surprised that she did not try to escape from him and hide somewhere away. Brother asked why she didn't come to eat lately. He also asked if she was always so, because the little one really believed that the common people were different from the aristocracy even physiologically. Edmund became tight near a girl who did not talk. He decided to go for a walk on his own. But this occupation was taught by his older brother. The boy asked the younger what he did. The little one hid behind his brother. He was ashamed and scary at the same time. Daniel, meanwhile, said that the holidays do not think of bow or kneel before him. She replied that she had already been trained. The young man began to teach the small and manipulate it. The task of Daniel was to teach respect for adults and make him no longer dare to make fun of someone and spoil the lives of loved ones. The boy told the girl that she has really changed a lot lately, and these changes were for the better. After all, a note of the nobility and aristocracy in her behavior, manners, and body movements began to see. Daniel asked if she would call him now because he was her brother and tried to get closer to her. Finally, they agreed that they would turn to each other by name. The young man asked the girl how she feels and whether it is difficult for her to live in this estate lately. Violet decided to tell honestly, because the intentions of the small were clearly good and friendly. The girl burst into tears. She felt lonely. Daniel promised that from now on they will be friends, and she will always be able to turn to him in various important issues and just come to visit. The girl did not understand why she wept. Perhaps the reason was that she did not hear a good word for a long time, or what it became so lonely. In addition to Finn, one could not talk to anyone. Violet asked in Finn about Daniel. The service was told that the second gentleman was a good person. He is most similar to the late mistress of the palace, the mother of all the sons of the Marquis. All praised Daniel. He has high learning success and always comes to the rescue and is ready to put his shoulder for help. Many believe that the boy is far outweighed even adult men from the noble environment. Finn was glad because the lady began to be interested in the affairs of this house and family. So she decided to talk about her third son. It was Daniel who made a lot of efforts to educate it. Otherwise, there would be a gallows. Already in the evening, the girl asked about the third lord. Finn replied that it was not worth talking about him. After all, he is also a brother, the oldest of all. But the holidays couldn't think about him in this regard. She came in contact with him, and the gaze of his cold eyes frightened her and made her want to hide somewhere. Finn said that the oldest son is most reminiscent of the Marquis, his father, character. The service said that the Marquis and his ancient genus have been engaged in the fact that they prepared a sword army for local rulers, Viscountess told this girl. And from this situation, there were restrictions. The heir could not be so because he was a descendant. He had to earn this right. Emptymund was brilliant. He has been preparing to become an heir to the genus for 12 years and is already a member of the Order of Knights. Not even 15 years old, the boy became part of the king's knightly order, which impressed everyone. It was very difficult and not easy to go there for a guy of his age. But Emmermund was able. In fact, according to the servant, the eldest son was very kind and educated. He had a wonderful education and a very wide outlook. The young man was marked by tolerance and willingness to come to the aid of anyone. Violet thought that the first meeting left a completely different impression. And now she was tormented by how to make contact with him to make friends and become his true named sister. In his estate, Earl Raziel drank wine and thought about two suns in the sky. It was difficult to understand who the aristocrat meant, the Pope and the King, or the holiday and one of these persons. But one thing was one, the Holy Virgin was in every possible way as both of them. just his foster daughter has not yet fully understood it. The father was nervous because there was no information about the church's plans. He wondered in the risal whether the representatives of the temple wanted to contact him. After all, they will now look for an option to get an ally who will help you get to the saint. The Marquis scared this silence. After all, he could not believe that after all the joints around the holy, the churchmen were able to calm down so quickly and leave their efforts to drag the girl on his side. The temple had to contact the Marquis and insist that he betray the king and went to the Pope faction, but even such reports were not from the church, and King Walet will not benefit. It was only known that the trusted person of the Pope himself, Cardinal Cesare, was still in the territories that controlled his iconicity of the Pope. No one could answer exactly what intentions Tigrenin had. He was always distinguished by radical thinking, but the course of his thoughts was difficult to follow. This young man has always applied unexpected and painful blows to the enemies of the Pope. It was worth beware of him. The regent interrupted the interlocutor. He stressed that it is impossible to allow the king to make nonsense because of his arrogance and the desire to attack the Pope. After all, he is stimulated by the fate of his predecessor on the throne. The Marquis thought that the interlocutor was right. The king absorbs hatred of the temple. However, people still remember the events that took place with the previous king, and his glory was not very good. When the people turned away from the church that began to disintegrate and grow in the process of corruption, all the views turned to the mighty king. It was he who had to be the last protection for the common people from arbitrariness. But then the Pope destroyed the plans of the king, who believed that he defeated his opponent. The priests began to tell people that King Astor was obsessed with demons and Malulo himself. In addition, spontaneous events began. The plague was played, and everyone believed that the king was guilty of this. The temple was still silent. He did not even try to help people and alleviate their suffering. The churchmen waited. And when it became completely unbearable, the Pope allowed the priests to help the victims. And once February to the churchmen, the people who accused them of all his sins began to praise the Pope and his assistants. They even began to say that the Duke could put his brother on presto, Cesare Tigrenin. But the young man gave up such a post. He believed that it would be more useful in the field of serving the church. And the king, which was accused of all troubles, could not do anything more except to take a very shameful step. He apologized and blessed in Cesare and Pope. It was the full collapse of His Highness of the King. The Marquis understood the concern of His Highness of the King, who had recently been at the next meeting. Holidays could not live outside the temple and serve ordinary people. The church had to strike soon. Paradise Zell replied that it is very sorry for the holiday itself. Even the metamorphoses that happened to her have also become an additional shock for a little girl. But the king will not dare to use it against the temple. The appearance of a little girl who rushed to the Riesel was detached from the conversation. It was his dear daughter. The man asked the little to kiss him, but the girl refused because he was carried with alcohol. The Marquis was surprised when he saw how a man who was a chancellor of the kingdom was changing in the presence of his child. For some reason, such feelings were born in the heart of a man, some unclear feeling. She was greeted to the Marquis, which she did not see. He realized that he would like his foster daughter to behave in the same way as the families of aristocrats and nobles. But he drove away similar thoughts. The girl quickly asked her father when he finishes, because the girl is very hungry and wants to have lunch with Dad. He replied that he would cook their favorite cake and they would taste it. Finally, she kissed her father, and he asked not to tell anything to her mother, because she would be angry that they would eat sweets again without her knowledge. The mother was opposed to abuse sweet. But suddenly the man asked his daughter that happened to the sweet buns he left on the table in her room, and they had to taste them together. But most likely she was eating them all to the end. The regent asked how the holidays in the house were felt, where only the men themselves were. He warned the Marquis that he did not think of punishing her for something and behaved warmly and gently because they are very vulnerable. Suddenly, Sisela asked whether she could see the holiday once, because their parents are friends. They can go to a joint vacation and get acquainted there. The girl was very interesting to see her. But his father asked if his daughter wanted to communicate with a common man who did not know even elementary manners. Her company could not like the girl, and she would be disappointed with a waste of time. Sisi asked that such a bad people in common people. After all, the holiday itself was noble in essence. She is blessed for good deeds by the Lord God and is higher than all aristocrats. The Marquis was thinking about whether to ask for a small one, but did not restrain it. He asked for Cecilia that the little girls like it, and how she would respond as a gift from her father. Finn and her young mistress considered a whole set of dresses for a little girl. Wayelet could not believe that it was all specifically for her, and she could use and dress every day. The service was delighted with her lady. She said that she was a truly noble kind, and she was even more beautiful than the daughters of kings and emperors. Finn is very happy that Wayelet has started to feel better. The holiday stood in front of the mirror. She could not believe that she could use it all, and why the father decided to buy all this for her. Such a sudden generosity for some reason could not allow her to relax. Adela came to the room. She looked at her pet carefully. The woman emphasized that they were very expensive dresses, and whether the real reason is known to give such beautiful things to a foster daughter. The tutor emphasized that from that day, Wayelet had to work on herself even more and more carefully. And you still need to match the status of a noble lady to wear such things on herself. Adela emphasized that it is worth staying and increasing the intensity of training, but later the caregiver realized that she did not have a lot to load the girl because she would not withstand such a pace. But the results were not satisfied. Adela took a ruler to the pound. She declared that she thought that the commoners were very difficult, but she did not expect that so bad and so difficult. The same should be accelerated by the violet. The girl realized that it had to happen something scary. But when Adela ordered to lift the dress, she immediately understood everything. Gout repeatedly punished her for the disobedience of the PBO, simply wrapped in a bad mood. Wayelet stood on a tap in front of Adele. She was preparing to happen now. The girl squeezed, but the woman did not punish her beating. Instead, the woman was going to correct her. Finally, the evening has come. The punishment could not be avoided. Adela said she would personally inform the Marquis that she beat the girl. She also stressed that the dress is not suitable for this commoners.